Hare Krishna, dear devotees, welcome back to the daily readings of Srila Prabhupada's books, right here in the live studios in Hythe, Kent, southeast England, just near the English Channel. We spent some time this afternoon with Bhakta Bland, who happens to know a lot about recording and the software that we're using to record the audiobook for Srila Prabhupada. And it looks like he may be able to help us. It's big news, big news. That's why I'm a little bit late. I don't know if I have a voice, but whatever it is yours, belongs to you. Okay. Oh, no sound. Now sound? Sound is okay now? Srimad Bhagavatamrta Stotram. 5 beautiful prayers glorifying the Srimad Bhagavatam from Srila Sanatana Goswami, the author of Brhad Bhagavatamrta. It goes like this. Sarva Shastrabdi Piyusha Sarva Vedaika Satpala Sarva Siddhanta Ratnaja Sarva Lokaika Drikprada. O nectar from the ocean of all scriptures, singular fruit of all the Vedas, rich mine of the precious gems of all conclusive truths, you are the only giver of sight to all the worlds. Sarva Bhagavata Prana Srimad Bhagavata Prabho Kalidwandotitaditya Sri Krishna Parivartita. O life air of all the Supreme Lord's devotees, O Master Srimad Bhagavatam, you are the sun risen in the darkness of Kali. You are the exact image of Sri Krishna. Paramananda Pataya Prema Varshak Shadayate Sarvadasa Vasevyaya Sri Krishnaya Namostume. I bow down to you who are supremely blissful to read. Your every syllable pours down a flood of prema. You can always be served by everyone. You are Sri Krishna himself. Madeka Bando Matsangin Madguru Mad Mahadana Mannisdadaga Mad Bhagya Mad Anandanamostute. My only friend, my constant companion, my spiritual master, my great wealth, my savior, my good fortune, my source of ecstasy, I bow down to you. Asadu sadutadayin atini chochatakada hanamun chagadachin mam premna rit kantayospura. O bestower of saintliness to the unsaintly, O exalter of the most fallen, please never leave me. Always appear in my heart and my voice with pure love. Om Namo Bhagavate Vasudevaya.
Om Namo Bhagavate Vasudevaya.
Om Namo Bhagavate Vasudevaya.
Om Namo Bhagavate
Om Namo Bhagavate
Vasudevaya.
Vasudevaya.
Om Namo Bhagavate Vasudevaya.
So, Gopakumar has reached Brahmaloka. And now we're hearing a description of the lotus feet of Krishna. How the devotees feel about him when they're in pure love. I think that he's about ready to go to the abode of liberation. We're starting with text 180 in the second chapter of Brhad Bhagavatamrta, the second part. His two beautiful lotus feet, therefore, embody the concentrated essence of happiness. Those who realize him through pure devotion surely attain that intense bliss. Commentary. The happiness of the devotees of the Supreme Personality of Godhead is much greater than the happiness of persons who meditate on impersonal Brahman. The two lotus feet of the Personality of Godhead are Srimat, endowed with all splendor. As the sage Parashara explains in the Vishnu Purana 122:53, just as the light of a fire situated in one place spreads in every direction, the energies of the Supreme Personality of Godhead, Para Brahman, spread all over the universe. And Sri Krishna says in the Bhagavad Gita 14:27, Brahmano hi pratishtaham amritasya vyayasya cha. I am the foundation of Brahman, the immortal and infallible. The Supreme Lord's lotus feet are pure spirit, perfect in eternity, knowledge, and bliss. Their effulgence is like the combined radiance of the sun and moon, and the worshippers of those feet naturally relish intense pleasure. In contrast, the pleasure of realizing the Brahman feature of the Supreme is minuscule. The jivas are the nature of this Brahman, and even though the individual effulgence of each of them is small, because the jivas are found everywhere, their combined effulgence pervades the entire universe. The pleasure of realizing Brahman and the jiva is not material, but it is inferior to the bliss gained by realizing the lotus feet of the Lord. Excuse me, I just lost my place here. The pleasure of realizing Brahman and the jiva is not material, but it is inferior to the bliss gained by realizing the lotus feet of the Lord. The individual jivas may be compared to solar and lunar rays. The atomic quanta of light shining forth from the sun and moon are expansions of the sun and moon and non-different from them. But although the rays of the sun and moon have many sun-like and moon-like qualities, such as brilliance, the rays each bear but a small part of the solar and lunar power. All this notwithstanding, when we compare both Brahman and the jivas with the material cosmos, we find that matter is not Satchidananda. And so, properly speaking, matter is not an angsha, non-different part of Parabrahman, but one of his shaktis, energies. Text 181. The 2 feet of Sri Krishna are considered like a piece of sugar because they are joyful and are a source of all joy. Brahman, however, is only joyful. Commentary. Lord Krishna's lotus feet are Sukha-rupa, the essence of joy itself, and Sukha-adhara, the object of love, in which his devotees taste countless varieties of joy. His feet are like a sugar lump, which is in essence nothing but sweetness, but is also a particular object that supplies sweetness. Brahman, in its essence, is bliss, but Brahman cannot be considered a source of bliss, because that would involve a duality, a difference between Brahman and its bliss. By definition, after all, Brahman is supposed to be free of duality. The concept of the personality of Godhead, however, is not limited in that way. He is the fathomless reservoir of wonders, deeper than millions of oceans. Just as various rivers enter into an ocean, many contrary qualities like oneness and duality enter and mingle within him. Text 182. If the identity of the jiva, the individual self, were the same as that of the Supreme Brahman, then the jiva would be the full embodiment of eternity, knowledge, and bliss. He would be the personality of Godhead himself. Commentary. Some philosophers think that God is nothing else than impersonal Brahman, which pervades the creation with consciousness, like the moon illuminating the sky with its rays. These philosophers may even take support for their idea from Srimad Bhagavatam 1-11, in which it is said, Brahmeti, Paramatmeti, Bhagavan, iti shabhyate. The same one absolute is called Brahman, Paramatma, and Bhagavan. But this impersonal view does not allow the conscious self, the jiva, any real individual existence apart from Brahman. And as the Bhakti Shastras explain in texts 182 through 188, not much happiness can be derived from the so-called liberation of identifying the jiva with Brahman, the Supreme. So Gopakumar is getting his spiritual education directly from the personified Vedas. Now the Bhakti Shastras are explaining to him why it is that just a touch of devotional service or bhakti makes the happiness of liberation seem insignificant, completely insignificant. So the Bhakti Shastras are continuing. 183. But the jivas are recognized as integral parts of the personality of Godhead. They are like the network of light that shines forth from the dense mass of light called the sun. Commentary. Parashara and other saintly authorities are of the opinion that the jivas are small, partial expansions of the Supreme Person. He is the Gana Tejas, the dense source of light, and they are small particles of light spreading out from him. Because there are so many jivas, they pervade the entire universe, just as the rays from the sun provide light, and heat for the entire universe, even though the sun globe is in one place, far away. 184. In relation to the Supreme Lord, the eternally existing jivas are distinct, like the rays of the sun, the sparks of a fire, or the waves of an ocean. Commentary. Someone may propose that the jivas appear distinct and many by the power of illusion, an illusion dispelled when liberation is achieved, and only pure non-difference remains. This idea is refuted in this verse and the next. Those who acknowledge that all the Lord's energies are real, look upon the jivas, not as illusions created by Maya, but as separated expansions of the Supreme Brahman, each with its own autonomous existence. Text 185. By the Supreme Lord's eternally existing potency called Maha-yoga, who is an aspect of his spiritual splendor, these jivas always stand separate from him. Commentary. If the illusory Maya does not create duality, then from whom does it arise? From where does it arise? It arises from the Supreme Lord's personal energy, who has always been acting on his behalf. By that energy, the jivas have their separate existence, not as an illusion, but in fact. Furthermore, since the power that maintains the separate identities of the jivas is an eternal energy of the Lord, the jivas themselves are also eternal. That energy is called Maha-yoga, or Yoga Maya, meaning that she can make the impossible possible, as she does when she manifests the distinction between the whole and the parts of the indivisible Supreme. She is an expansion of the Lord's internal energy, and thus she is not a creator of unreality. Sri Krishna describes her in the Bhagavad Gita 7.25, Naham prakasha sarvasya yogamaya samavritaha. I am not manifest to everyone, for I am covered by my yogamaya. Text 186. Therefore, saintly authorities consider the jivas both different and non-different from the Supreme. As a rule, even when the jivas are liberated, the difference endures. Commentary. The jivas are non-different from Brahman, in that they share with him the nature of being pure spirit, eternal, conscious, and blissful. Simultaneously, being parts of him and having other distinct qualities, they are different from him. As illustrated in the examples given in text 184, the parts of a whole, such as the rays of the sun, the sparks of a fire, and the waves of an ocean, are non-different from the whole because they partake of the qualities of the whole. Yet they differ from the whole by virtue of being separate, many, and diminutive. The parts and the whole always remain separate, and thus even Sri Shankaracharya has said, Mukta api lilaya vigraham kritva bhagavantam bhajanti. Even the liberated accept new bodies as their pastime to worship the Supreme Lord. This idea is also consistent with the statements of the Mahapuranas and other scriptures. For example, Srimad Bhagavatam 6.14.5 states, O great sage, among many millions who are liberated and perfect in knowledge of liberation, one may be a devotee of Lord Narayana or Krishna. Such devotees who are fully peaceful are extremely rare. If upon attaining liberation, a person were to merge as one with Brahman, who would remain to take on a new body for pastimes? Or what liberated soul would engage in bhakti as a devotee of Lord Narayana? Having no individual existence separate from Brahman would disallow the liberated Atma from doing any of this. Nor can we explain away the cited statements by saying that they refer to persons who are jivan mukta, who have earned liberation, but are still living in material bodies. Such persons already have bodies, and therefore need not assume bodies for pastimes. The 6th canto verse cited above states that some liberated souls worship Narayana. In the Kartik-mähätmya section of the Padma Purana, tells of an advanced sage in a human body who merged into the Supreme Lord and then later obtained a form similar in appearance to that of Lord Narayana. Similarly, in that discourse about fasting on Nrsimha Chaturdashi, the Brihad Nrsimha Purana relates how a fallen Brahmana and a prostitute merged into the Supreme and then again took birth as Prahlad Maharaj and his wife. Many histories like these serve as evidence that the jiva continues its individual existence after liberation. Only as a concession does the current verse use the word prayaha as a general rule to indicate that in certain cases the Lord may, by his sweet will, allow someone to attain sayuja, the nirvana of entering his body. Text 187. The original forms of the jivas are made of eternity, knowledge, and bliss. But by the beginningless illusion of Krishna's Maya, the jivas forget their true identities and wander, deluded in the cycle of birth and death. Commentary. This verse and the next answer the following doubt. If the separate individual existence of the jiva continues even in the liberated state, what do the many lifetimes of effort for liberation actually accomplish? As explained here, the material energy of the personality of Godhead, Krishna, creates for the jivas an illusion that for all practical purposes is without beginning. An illusion that makes them forget their essential identity as parts of Him and begin wandering in material life. It is this deluded, aimless life that is unreal, because in truth, the jivas do not belong to the world of birth and death. Text 188. When a jiva is liberated by knowledge of his true self, Maya ceases to act on him and his wanderings come to an end. He then perceives himself to be full of bliss as a small portion of the Supreme. Commentary. The jiva is liberated when he attains knowledge of his own real identity as pure spirit. The spiritual self-knowledge one gains in the preliminary stage gives only partial spiritual happiness. But that stage of liberation can then lead to the full self-realization of Krishna consciousness, in which one finds full ecstasy. Devotees of the personality of Godhead are superior to persons who are merely liberated, for though the devotees and the merely liberated share the same spiritual identity as jivas, the devotees enjoy the special happiness of bhakti in their worship of the Lord and their realization of His lotus feet. Text 189. In all spheres of activity, the results one achieves match the discipline one has practiced. I'll repeat that again. In all spheres of activity, the results one achieves match the discipline one has practiced. Thus, in the liberation attained by knowledge of one's own self, the result is meager. Commentary. To clarify their point, the Bhakti Shastras here introduce the general principle that results come. I'll read it again. To clarify their point, the Bhakti Shastras here introduce the general principle that results come according to the means one employs. This rule applies to both ordinary and transcendental life. Scissors cannot do the job of an axe, nor can methods aimed merely at realizing the Jiva soul yield the same result as methods for realizing the Supreme Soul. The sadhana of acquiring knowledge of the Jiva soul, who is but a small part of Brahman, gives but a partial, insignificant result in liberation, because the sadhana itself is only partial. Text 190. Suffering the torments of material existence and lacking the taste for loving exchanges in true spiritual life, seekers of liberation profusely glorify liberation, just as persons aspiring for heaven praise heaven. Commentary. Why do some transcendentalists describe the happiness of liberation as supreme? Because they are frustrated with material life and they misunderstand real spiritual life. Their minds are disturbed by the pains of birth, death, and other torments of this world, and so they cannot taste rasa, that special, heart-melting spiritual nectar of love that pure devotees have for the Supreme Lord. In that deprived condition, such frustrated non-devotees develop the desire to attain liberation. They glorify liberation in many ways, but their words do nothing to make liberation more than it actually is. The example given here is that of persons unaware of the faults of Swargaloka, heaven, and therefore eager to achieve it. They praise heaven profusely, citing such words as these: the happiness of the residents of heaven comes just as desired, stays untainted by misery, and is not overtaken by misery at the end. That's the Vadartha from Gadadhar Bhatta. Sense enjoyers are unmindful that the residents of Swargaloka quarrel, that they fear losing their positions, and that their enjoyment of heaven is temporary and tarnished by various kinds of discomfort. Text 191. But only in devotional service does the highest degree of happiness naturally arise. That happiness is the right reward for those who practice serving the Supreme Lord's all-blissful lotus feet. Text 192. The highest degree indicates greatness that has reached its ultimate peak, but in fact, that endless happiness has no limit. Commentary. The glories of devotional service are difficult to describe without straining the capacity of words. The phrase parakashta, highest degree, implies that no higher degree exists. But the happiness of pure devotional service never reaches a final peak. it keeps on increasing forever. Calling it the parakashta of happiness is only a poetic attempt to do it justice with words available in human language. Text 193. That happiness increases endlessly. It is limitless and supremely great. In contrast, the happiness of Brahman found in liberation never increases because it is limited. Commentary. The Bhakti Shastras here explicitly confirm that the happiness of bhakti increases constantly, and to dispel any misconception that this increase may eventually come to an end, they further qualify it as ananta, endless. At every moment, pure devotees experience bhakti rasa as newer and newer, sweeter and sweeter, and more intense. Because Brahman cannot develop or transform in any way, the happiness of realizing Brahman is static. When impersonalists call their Brahma Sukha the parakashta of happiness, they mean that it has virtually reached a peak, beyond which it can progress no further. Text 194. The Supreme Lord is also the Supreme Soul and the Supreme Brahman. Since they are all the same one being, they cannot be considered different members of the same category. Commentary. The Vedas are accepted as perfect authority, both by impersonalists and by devotees of the Supreme Lord. But when the Vedic Upanishads declare that there is no duality in the Supreme, the personalists and the impersonalists understand this in opposite ways. For the Advaitavadi impersonalists, the oneness of Brahman means that all form and variety are illusion. For the Vaishnavas, however, the Supreme, or the One, is full of variety. How this can be so, the Vedas now to begin to explain to Gopakumar, starting with 2 verses discussing the absence of difference in the Supreme. Differences can be analyzed in terms of 2 kinds, as being of 2 kinds, sajatiya and vijatiya. Similar things, like 2 men, will differ as individuals. This is called sajatiya bheda, the difference between members of the same category. Dissimilar things, like a man and a cow, differ by vichatiya bheda, by the difference between members of separate categories. It means that among human beings, which are all one category, each one is different. And the difference between the cow and the man is the difference between 2 things that are of 2 different categories. Now, because the jivas are manifestations of Brahman, and because in earlier verses we heard that the jivas are always distinct as individuals, someone may object that we here find ourselves facing a Brahman in which there are sajatiya differences. That is, Brahman now seems to consist of members of one category who differ from one another. But this makes no sense, because it would contradict the very nature of Brahman, which by definition of the authoritative Upanishads is ekam, absolutely one, and advayam, allowing of no differences whatsoever. Point taken. But how, as expressed by the formula Ekam Advayam, the Supreme is free of all dualities, Sajatiya and Vijatiya is shown in a different way, in this verse and the next. Despite our being surrounded by a world full of apparent variety, the impersonalists construe Ekam Advayam in its most strictly literal sense, saying that there are absolutely no dualities at all. But what the Vedas actually mean by these words fits much more sensibly with our common experience. How Brahman is Ekam, that is, free from Jatiya, Sajatiya differences, is best understood in the following way. The impersonal absolute, Para-Brahman, the indwelling controller of the jivas, Paramatma, and the Supreme Personality of Godhead, Param Eshwara, or One Absolute Truth. There is no difference between the three. When that Supreme Absolute, as the Personality of Godhead, further expands into countless forms, Guna avatars, Lila avatars, and so on, these avatars may seem different from one another, but in reality they are one and the same person. In all his plenary manifestations, he never becomes any less than his full self, in spite of external appearances. Thus, any attempt to analyze the plenary expansions of Godhead as different members of one category is doomed to fail. Brahman does, however, have expansions of his energy in the form of the finite living beings, as discussed in the next verse, text 195. The jivas always have their own identities, different from that of the Supreme, but they are parts of the Supreme and cannot exist separate from him, and this rules out the difference called Vijatiya. Commentary. This verse establishes the actual way that Brahman is Advayam, free from all dualities. The jivas, it is true, belong to categories other than Brahman, such as the category of things that have finite size. In that sense, they are different from Brahman. But in other respects, they are non-different from him. They are expansions of the same creative living force, of which Brahman's own Supreme Personality consists, and they are his integrated parts, naturally sharing many of his qualities. Thus, although they are individuals and eternally remain so, they are not entirely separate from the absolute Brahman, the Supreme Person. Text 196. We fully approve of this philosophical doctrine, called Bheda Bheda. Indeed, when it is presented with logical argument, everything about it is certain and irrefutable. Commentary. The scriptures, dedicated solely to propounding pure devotional service, agree with the concept of Bheda Bheda, and with its logical supporting arguments. With the help of this philosophical framework for understanding the identities, relationships, and purposes of all things that exist, the Bhakti Shastras faultlessly explain the path of devotional service and reconcile all possible doubts and contradictions, both spoken and unspoken. Thus, the presentation of the Bhakti Shastras is definitive, dhruvam. The impersonalists say that since the jivas come into being from Brahman and are again absorbed back into Brahman, they are altogether non-different from Brahman. But even according to this theory, the happiness of impersonal liberation is meager, because that liberation rules out perception of the totality of Brahman. Waves do not arise in one part of an ocean and dissolve in another. On the ocean shore, and since the waves in the ocean consist of the same water, they are non-different. Yet even though the waves, when they dissolve, again become one with the ocean, in the sense that their separate existence is no longer visible, the waves don't have the same depth as the ocean, nor can they generate precious jewels. So the waves in the ocean are also different. Applying the metaphor of the ocean and the waves, one formulation of impersonalist theory would have it that when the jivas attain liberation by merging back into the individual portions of Brahman from which they originated, they again become one with Brahman. But the Bhakti Shastras respond that because the jivas are by their very nature separate and finite, they cannot become the undivided Supreme and enjoy all of his unlimited bliss. On the contrary, even according to the theory, they continue to exist separately in liberation, retaining their individuality, even in union with the Supreme. This implies that although they are non-different from Brahman, they are also, in some ways, different from him. The scriptures accordingly describe that sometimes, by the Supreme Lord's special mercy, a liberated soul, merged into oneness with Brahman, becomes eager for the joys of bhakti, and once again assumes his distinct identity, so that he can have a spiritual body with which to serve the Lord. On this point, Sri Shankaracharya Pad has said, "My Lord, even when all difference is gone, I am still yours, although you are not mine. A wave belongs to the ocean, but surely the ocean does not belong to the wave." Prarthana Shatpadi 3. This statement by Acharya Shankar, expressing the basic idea of the Bheda philosophy, is very much to the point. Even after the jiva's illusory difference from the Lord is destroyed, his real difference of belonging to the Lord remains. If this were not so, there would be no meaning to the words Nata Tavaham, Lord, I am yours. The separate river waters cannot literally become the ocean, which has qualities the rivers do not possess, like the ability to produce gems. The rivers are only said to become one with the ocean because after they flow into the ocean, their separate existence is no longer visible. But in fact, that oneness is unreal. In the same way, liberation as impersonally conceived is unreal, for it implies that liberation equals non-existence, like that of an extinguished flame. Again, if the liberated self has become completely one with Brahman, he has no scope for happiness, since the liberated self is not supposed to keep the mind and other faculties of individual consciousness with which happiness could be tasted. Even when liberated, the soul remains individual. Thus, when the standard scriptures consider the four kinds of annihilation, the constant degradation of matter, the partial destruction of the universe at the end of Brahma's day, the total destruction of the universe at the end of Brahma's life, and the liberation of individual souls, the scriptures distinguish between liberation and total annihilation. Hare Krishna. That's 805. We'll stop here in this deep philosophical exposition of the Bhakti Shastras to reveal the superiority of the happiness of devotional service as opposed to the happiness of Brahman, liberation or realization. Hare Krishna. Okay, we'll stop at here and we'll start up with 197 tomorrow. Okay, do we have any, after all of that heavy philosophical stuff, we have any reflections or?
That's from Gopakanya Devi Dasi.
Gopakanya Devi Dasi, Hare Krishna.
Hare Krishna, dear Maharaj and old friends, Jai Srila Prabhupada, and glories to Sri Maharaj for blessing us daily with the nectar from Brhad Bhagavatam.
Hare Krishna.
Rati Manjari said, Jai Guru Maharaj, take us.
Who says?
Rati Manjari.
Rati Manjari.
Mm-hmm.
Haribo Rati. I thought there would be fewer reflections on that. Pretty heavy stuff. There's one nice section in the fifth chapter of this part, where Narada Muni is speaking to Gopakumar, and he's explaining that the impersonalists think that there's a defect in the so-called conclusion of devotional service, which means variegated activity. Because their idea is, if it's the goal, then there should be just the goal and there should be nothing, no variety in it, nothing. Then you can be sure that you've reached the conclusion. So they see a fault. But in reality, the fact that there are continued activities in devotional perfection is not a fault. It is just an exhibition that the pleasure of relating with the Lord in service never ends. It's the real example of eternity. And basically that's what they've been saying here, in essence. The material mind wants a goal. And once you've reached that goal, that's it. There's no further place to go. But in devotional service, there's more, and there's more, and there's more, and there's more. And the impersonalists think, oh, that's faulty, because the goal, there is no more. Because they can't conceive of an activity that goes on increasing and giving further and further satisfaction. Now, we may not be great philosophers, and we may not be, liberated souls in the spiritual world actually tasting these things, but it is a fact. At least I've been chanting now for 48 years, Hare Krishna, and I've chanted a whole lot more than 16 rounds a day, a whole lot more. And yet, it just keeps getting better. I don't come to the end of it and then just stop because I've reached the end. So we have, actual evidence ourselves in our, like we've been reading these books for the same amount of years, and yet every time I hear them, I get more knowledge from it. I get a taste that continues to get better. This is the actual taste, or actual test rather, of having reached the absolute truth. There's always more to it, because the absolute truth is unlimited. And there's always more bliss, because the actual absolute truth is full of transcendental variegatedness and transcendental pleasure of activity in spiritual life and devotional service. Hare Krishna. I'd like to thank you all. And actually, the truth be told, I've been kind of working out today, trying to figure out how to go forward with our audiobook project, and a aspiring devotee, Bhakta Bland, who I had a couple of conversations with over the internet, came today, and we spent a long time together getting to know him, and he showed us what his knowledge of the software is, and it was substantial. So we might have made some tangible progress, because he's agreed to come and help on this project, which, by the way, has been set back in terms of time, by my fall and Rasika's eyes giving out, frankly. So this was a big day, and what a nice way to end the day, with all of you hearing Brhad Bhagavatamrta. And you have something? Okay, we have something from you all.
From Rati Manjari.
From Rati Manjari. She's always the last one to get something. Go ahead.
Dear Guru Maharaj, please accept my humble obeisances. I do not have a specific question, but I find it fascinating to hear, and also to hear deeply the superiority of bhakti so deeply established in our shastras. It is fortifying,
yes.
I also like to hear that Sripad Sanaracharya has sprinkled many clear statements of devotion in between his impersonal teaching.
Yeah, well, it's not exactly in between. Most of it is in the introduction, in his commentary to the Bhagavad Gita. But, yeah, it is a fact that you cannot hide it. You cannot hide that the goal of life is transcendental happiness, of devotional service. Prabhupada often quotes those sections, and then at the end he said, Bhaja Govinda, Bhaja Govinda, Bhaja Govinda, Madhurmana. Can't remember the exact Sanskrit, but it means that you fools, your grammatical jugglery will not help you at the time of death. You must chant the names of Govinda, chant the names of Govinda, chant the names of Govinda. Sri Brhad Bhagavatamrta ki jai. Samaveda Bhakta Brinda ki jai. All glories to all the devotees of the Lord. Samaveda Bhakta Brinda ki jai. Gaur Premanandi Hari Hari Bol. So please, come over tomorrow night too, and we'll taste together the creme de la creme, de la creme de la creme de la creme de la creme, de la creme de la creme. Hare Krishna. See you tomorrow night.